Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more stuff. I'm so used to saying more members of because that's more or less a everyday video. But anyway, today, even though we're late on talking about it, we are talking about the holiday Juneteenth. Juneteenth celebrates the end of slavery. Yeah. Um, June the 19th, 1865. Almost 2 full years after uh, Abraham Lincoln emancipated slaves in America. So, 1863, um, Emancipation Proclamation, which was the announcement of we're ending slavery. Yeah, January 1st, 1863. Proclamation 95 is what it was as per executive order. But essentially stated, yeah, the U.S. no longer recognizes slavery. And it was done during the Civil War because that's the largest issue by and far, without a doubt, what the Civil War was over. Anyone else who tells you anything else has been fucking lying to you. Go and read the reasons for cessation. In every one, almost the very first issue mentioned the right of slavery. Lincoln ends this with the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863, so during the war itself. However, Juneteenth, first one is June the 19th, 1865. And you have to remember, the Civil War itself ended even before then, May the 26th, 1865. That was the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, if I remember correctly, where Lee signed the agreement of surrender to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Yeah, symbolically as the end of the war, although arguably there are several different dates for the war's conclusion. But it is agreed upon Lee's surrender to Grant set off the wave of Confederate surrenders. So yeah. The last military department of the Confederacy, the Department of the Trans-Mississippi, disbanded May the 26th. Even though the Appomattox Courthouse surrender was on April 9th. But yeah. So, still 2 months, it would be another almost 2 full months since the end of the Civil War when the actual first Juneteenth is celebrated, when the Emancipation Proclamation's full power came into effect, freeing all former slaves. So June the 19th, 1865, Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay in Texas with news of freedom. More than 250,000 African Americans embraced freedom by executive decree in what became known as Juneteenth or Freedom Day. With the principles of self determination, citizenship, and democracy magnifying their hopes and dreams, those Texans held fast to the promise of true liberty for all. So you've got to remember, Galveston Bay is far southeast of Texas. I think it's further south than Houston. So yeah, it's pretty close to the bottom of the state. It's not at the full bottom, but yeah, you're talking reaching the far tip of the Confederacy. So yeah. And remember, this is the mid 1800s. News takes longer to travel. There were still battles and skirmishes. And I'm sure many slave holding individuals who did not want to release slaves, release African Americans. So yeah, Juneteenth changed that. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. The wolves, this involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired laborer instead of slave and slave owner. So yeah. Although even in that era, it's still a tough issue. The historical legacy of Juneteenth. On Freedom's Eve, or the eve of January the 1st, 1863, the first watch night services took place. On that night, enslaved and free African Americans gathered in churches and private homes all across the country awaiting news that the Emancipation Proclamation had taken effect. At the stroke of midnight, prayers were answered as all enslaved people in Confederate states were declared legally free. Union soldiers, many of whom were black, marched into plantations and across cities in the South, reading small copies of the Emancipation Proclamation, spreading the news of freedom in the Confederate States. Only through the 13th Amendment did emancipation end slavery through the United States. So remember, the Emancipation Proclamation itself is an executive order. Only so much power behind an executive order. But the 13th Amendment, an amendment to the Constitution, I mean, it makes it a constitutional right. The 13th Amendment is passed by Congress in 1865, so neither slavery nor involuntary servitude. However, the amendment would pass with much controversy over its interpretation. Yeah, Emancipation Proclamation, as we've mentioned earlier, 1863, only freed slaves held in Confederate states. But Again, only so much power, and much of the Confederate States would ignore it because we're still in a point of wartime. Uh, the 13th Amendment made emancipation a national policy and was passed by the United States Senate on April the 8th, 1864, and by the House on January 31st, 1865. So it became a U.S. policy by February of 1865. It was in the Constitution. The joint resolution of both bodies that submitted the amendment to the states for approval was signed by Lincoln February the 1st. See, it passes the House January 31st. Next day, Lincoln's like, signed. It would be ratified. It would take it a whole year later, December the 6th, 1865, and was the first of the three Reconstruction Amendments, 13th, 14th, 15th, dealing with the end of slavery, the right to vote for former slaves, and I can't remember for sure what the other one was, but yeah. But anyway, yeah. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So slavery has been ended. A form of slavery or involuntary servitude can be imposed upon a criminal as a form of punishment as long as the criminal has been duly convicted. If you're still waiting for your trial, they can't do a thing like that to you. They can hold you in prison if you're unable to get bail. But yeah, honestly, the idea of bail should be restricted instead of forcing a person to be locked in prison or pay money. No. There should be a form of like an electronic lock on them and have a officer of the peace outside their property to watch over them. If they run or try to run, that can be tacked upon their full sentencing. But yeah, I believe holding people in jail, no. No. That's bullshit. The idea that prison in the first place was meant as to be used as an attempt of rehabilitation. But of course, that's changed. Anyway, off the topic of prison reform here, Yeah. But 1863, January 1st, the proclamation. It immediately goes and is passed by the states that are still in the Union during the Civil War, and the American Congress passes it with the Senate on April 8th, 1864, and the House on January 31st, 1865. The 13th Amendment enforcing emancipation as a national policy. And then, like we said, 1865, you have a number of points of surrender. April was Appomattox Courthouse, which was when the big surrender by Lee to Grant happened. That was April 9th, 1865. And with the disbandment of the Department of the Trans-Mississippi on May the 26th, just over a month later, the official end to the war is considered, although as from here to here there are still skirmishes, and from May the 26th to June the 19th there are still skirmishes. But you have groups of free African Americans, former slaves, and Union soldiers moving southward, spreading the word, making sure all levels of slavery are disbanded. All rebelling groups are disbanded. And so June the 19th, with them reaching the furthest south into Galveston Bay, that's where the idea of Juneteenth comes from. The word itself is a combination of June and 19th, Juneteenth, which honestly you could just call it National Emancipation Day, National Cessation of Slavery Day. But it's Juneteenth. Yeah. Officially, Juneteenth National Independence Day is a federal day in the United States. Celebrated annually on June the 19th to commemorate the ending of slavery in the U.S. The holiday's name is a portmanteau of the words June and 19th, as it was on June 19th, 1865, when Major General Gordon Granger ordered the final enforcement of the Emancipation Proclamation in Texas at the end of the American Civil War. So yeah. And yeah, that gives us a good look at the idea of Juneteenth, what it was, what it's about. But yeah. And honestly, I was never taught about it in school. End of the Civil War, surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, lead a grant. Yeah, I was taught all that. 13th Amendment went through. I was never told anything about Juneteenth when I was in school. We're talking the 1990s here. 80s and 90s is when I was a school age kid. Um, but yeah. My aim is so bad I keep missing that. Anyway. End of slavery. We'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something that you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting links and my sources in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.